Welcome to JSA TV Europe, together with the Green Data Movement for this quarter's live event focused on European digital infrastructure sustainability. I'm Jean-Marc Lima, and joining me today is Bardiya Monzavi, co-founder and director of business development at Cirkla. Bardiya, so nice to meet you. I think what Cirkla is doing, it's fascinating because it's really giving a second life to data center hardware and the market itself, and of course with it saving a huge carbon footprint from some of the operators in this space. But before we go into the company, let's kind of just set the picture of what's happening in the industry today. So, what would you say are the three major actions that all operators should take right now in order to expand their sustainability efforts?
Well, first of all, Joe, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here, and it's also a privilege to be working in the field of sustainability. And for those that know me, they know that wherever I go, I'm always wearing my iMasons Climate Accord badge, and of course the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals badge. I'm an avid supporter of sustainability, and I'm actually really happy to be in such a sustainability forward industry. To answer your question, I think I would say I like to run by the motto of three main things that we can do as an entire industry is educate, innovate, and collaborate. And within these three sort of main pillars, I think I'd like to break it down into three sort of main components of sustainability in the data center and ICT industry. And for this, I look at the value chain. So we look at the suppliers of infrastructure hardware and the construction companies. And then we look at the operators of the data centers, which you've got the co-location providers and the cloud providers. Then you've got the users, the people that actually use the data centers and take space in them. I think one thing that we, as a segment, really like to do is put a responsibility on ourselves to be as sustainable as possible. And I think we should really celebrate this because the industry has been doing well in finding new methods of being sustainable and in achieving sustainability metrics and setting reasonable goals to achieve sustainability. But I think the sustainability goes across the value chain, as I mentioned earlier. I think as the operators, one thing that they can do is definitely look at their suppliers. How sustainable are the suppliers in terms of the raw materials that are used? Are the raw materials ethically sourced? Are they recycled? Is the packaging material used for the assets that they're developing green and sustainable? Are the transportation methods sustainable? Then, of course, with the operators, we've got a huge amount of components that we look at with sustainability. For example, energy. The data center industry right now consumes about 200 terawatt hours of energy on a yearly basis. This is not an insignificant number. And when we look at the numbers of the fact that 73% of the world's carbon emissions are generated from energy consumption and production, this definitely puts a lot of importance on the energy consumption part of data centers. And we've been seeing a lot of innovation in this over the past few years. There are a lot of projects that are right now using 100% renewable energy. And in fact, some of the projects are producing renewable energy for each megawatt that they consume. I think this is a great method to move forward with sustainability and reducing carbon emissions. I also think that there are other sources of energy that we can look at. For example, nuclear. In fact, I wrote an article about this just a couple of weeks ago in which I found that nuclear energy produces 15 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. As opposed to coal, which generates 1,000 grams. It's a huge difference. Now, of course, drawing it back to saying educate, innovate, and collaborate, we see that when it comes to alternative energy sources like nuclear, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And of course, a lot of innovation is taking place. We see a lot of innovation in the space of small modular reactors, which are tiny and can be fitted into a data center to power a great part of them. The way that I see it, if they're using them in submarines below the sea, why can't they be used in data centers above the ground? And of course, I also think there is a part of the responsibility goes on our end users as well as an industry. As the providers of the data center space and as the suppliers, we can only do so much. At the end of the day, the people that are consuming our product, which is the energy and the space, are the end users. We should also look into how we can sort of collaborate with them to ensure that the energy that we're providing them is being deployed and used as efficiently as possible? Are the servers configured perfectly? Well, obviously there's no such thing as perfect, but are they configured in a way that no, exactly, close to perfect. I mean, if we have 99.99% uptime,
that's very good.
We can have 99% efficiency as well. No, but I think it's a cross-industry effort. And there are other industries involved in this as well. I think the financial industry is also very much involved in the data center industry in terms of where the funding comes from, and of course how where the users are coming from. And of course, we see the legal space here as well in terms of the regulation. Now, there have been over the past few years some really, really good and impactful regulations that have been coming through. And of course, as an industry, we're very self-regulating. We're risk averse. We don't like it when the outside sources tell us how to operate. But it's been really good to see, the industry coming together, the leaders of the industry coming together and allowing a way for companies to benchmark themselves against one another, to then collaborate and to reach those goals. And I think to add to the sort of three pillars of educate, innovate, and collaborate, I think we should also celebrate the successes that we achieve, amplify the voices of the successes that we have achieved in sustainability and in reducing our carbon emissions, and of course being ESG centric. To go on a tangent about ESG, I also think that sustainability is about more than environmental conservation. I think there are so many other things that we should look at. For example, diversity. We look at gender diversity, age diversity, ethnic diversity. We look at enabling sort of developing economies and markets to actually have access to high quality equipment and a high quality of life. And I think as an industry which is so tied into the core of everyone's lives around the world, I think there is a lot that we can do and celebrate in terms of our contributions to sustainability.
Okay, there's a lot to dissect there. Now I'll get into the part of the diversification of talents and the enablement of new ideas to flourish. I'll get into that in a second as well, because I think what Cirkla does actually does fit quite well into the conversation. But I mean, you touched on a lot of things that are quite interesting. So I mean, educate, innovate, and collaborate. I think those three pillars are essential to anything, not just sustainability, but are essential to any successful story. I think the nuclear side of the conversation, again, for the education especially, there needs to be a lot more education. And we see that not just within the data center space. Actually, data center people might be a bit more open to nuclear than maybe the next person on the street. I think there's a bit of fight back on that sense. But there was that startup as well. They developed a nuclear reactor that can produce 1 gigawatt of power. It's a portable nuclear reactor. So that could be something coming up in the terms of what you just said. It's just how will this be policed, because we don't want a nuclear reactor to fall in the wrong hands.
No, absolutely. I agree with you entirely. Look, I'm from Iran, so I'm familiar with these arguments.
Yeah, I was not even saying that way, but I was just thinking you just don't want someone to go into a data center and steal a nuclear reactor and do something that they shouldn't do. But I mean, absolutely. Even your point around the end users as well, another big discussion. I know the infrastructure maintenance community is quite involved in that. How do we not only educate the end user to how they use the infrastructure and also their carbon footprint because of what they are consuming, but then how does that can be cascaded down to the eyeballs? And then your points around finance and regulation. I mean, two massive topics, two shifting topics as well. Finance is changing. Regulations are just going to drop on the industry. It's not a drop. It's a lot of them are coming in very quickly now. So it's going to be very interesting.
Absolutely.
I was going to say another big thing. And I mean, so going back a few years, when we are children, we are taught on how to recycle. And we say we need to cycle to save the planet and all that. But there was something that doesn't seem to happen as much in some of the world's largest industries. And in the data center space, there is something that also still is in the early stages. So how important do you think recycling of hardware is? And this is where I think Cirkla comes in, because Cirkla, that's Cirkla's essence. How important it is that we are doing this now to really give a second life to this hardware?
Well, I think the conversation of waste is a really interesting one. And to answer your question about the importance, I think what we have is the benefit of time right now, in the sense that our industry it's been around for a while. It's been around since before I was born, and it's constantly innovating. But I don't think that it's become a mature industry yet compared to other industries such as agriculture and media. When you look at the agriculture industry, they're completely, mostly waste-free. I mean, you look at mass producers of meat, and they essentially, to be very crude, use every part of the animal as some kind of produce or byproduct. And I think in the data center space and the ICT sector, we're sort of really early on, and we have the ability to shape these cultures moving forward. I think when we look at the waste, there's 4 types of waste that I can think of just off the top of my head. One of them, of course, is the construction waste, which is a bit rarer. We don't really see so much construction waste because it's not very often that an entire data center is demolished. But to counteract that, I mean, we could, again, new data centers have the benefit here because they can build sustainability into the model, right? So, for example, using sustainable materials like recyclable concrete, recycled and recyclable concrete. Again, it's not as common as the other types of waste that we see, but I think it's definitely an important place to take a look at. Probably some other people have some more expertise that can share some knowledge with you on that one. And then we look at the IT waste, which has been gaining a lot of popularity in the past few years, and it's been sort of breeding its own multi-billion-dollar industry. Is what do we do with the servers at the end of their lifespan? Now, the average shelf life of a server is about 8 to 10 years if it's used properly. In most enterprise applications, a server is refreshed every 5 years. There are various reasons for this. Energy efficiency and high quality components and sort of bleeding edge technology are some of them. But what do we do at the end of this waste? To give you a statistic, 50 million tons of e-waste are generated on a yearly basis, and only 20% is recycled. The rest is sent to landfill, and part of it is repurposed. Now, I like to highlight, as part of my one pillar of collaboration, I'd really like to highlight that there are some amazing initiatives right now, such as IT Renew, OCP, TechBuyer, Sadasi, who are really educating the market and providing proactive ways of recycling and reusing these IT assets, like the servers, for example. In some cases, they take the servers, they refurbish them themselves, and then they sell it onto the secondhand market. And all of this because they were able to educate the market on how to do this. And then we look at the hyperscalers and some of the R2 certified recycling centers dedicated to stripping down these IT components and providing an accurate way and a sustainable way of recycling them. These are great initiatives right now that are taking place in the industry that I think, to use your phrasing, will definitely bleed down and should bleed down into the rest of the industry. The next type of waste that we see is M&E infrastructure waste, which is where Cirkla is really active in. And this is a tricky one because it's when you look at the end of a life cycle of a crack unit or a UPS, these assets can be used for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years if you're really, really stretching it. But there are cases when the assets are purchased and then they're just not used to their full capacity, because the strategy, the data center strategy of the owner changes for whatever reason. What is done with those assets right now is that they're either scrapped or just kept in storage for spare part, and in some instances they're recycled. I think it's really, really important to have a plan for the end of the life cycle of these kinds of assets, to have a very clear plan of saying, okay, we're going to be recycling these assets by the end of year 9, for instance, and we're going to do it with a recycling partner who is certified in this kind of space, and we're going to put this into our business model right now. Alternatively, at the end of year 5, we're going to resell it on the secondhand market, which offsets to some extent, offsets Scope 3 emissions, which is a very, very big touch point right now. And then obviously what this does is it obviously creates more space for sustainability. Again, some challenges that we see with M&E waste is being, I say waste, but end-of-life assets being reused in another space is the inherent reliability challenges. When, it's mostly, you want to have something which you can rely on for the next 5 to 10 years. You want to have assets that you don't have to spend too much on in terms of servicing it and repairing it. And of course, you want to have the most energy efficient assets. But of course, there are times when something from 5, 6 years ago will do the same job. And the way that I like to see it is as such. We look at reliability in so many different aspects of our lives. We will, as people, happily purchase a secondhand car, which is driven for 150,000, 200,000 miles by someone else or maybe multiple people. And when we sit in one of those cars and we put our hands on the steering wheel, we're entrusting our lives in one of those machines that we don't know the history of. So why can't we apply the same to M&E assets? M&E assets where we can see the assets physically in person and we can see documented service history and maintenance records. Why can't we do the same? And if reliability is an issue, purchase 2 instead of 1. We can definitely build redundancy into this. But I also think that there should be more attention given to recycling these assets rather than just sort of repurposing them. The same way that IT assets have a lot of recycling initiatives around them, I definitely think now's a really good time to build these recycling initiatives, as we see a lot of the legacy data centers going through their refresh rates right now over the next 3 years, since the past couple of years. I think now's a great time to build these initiatives.
That's interesting. So how do you reach out to operators and get the pieces from them? Because as you said, the next video is going to be interesting because I guess we're reaching the phase now. It's been about 10 years since the big expansion started in the industry. So I guess we're starting this cycle, which will not have an end to it because every year It's just another celebration of the last 10 years. So how do you collaborate with them?
Well, as Cirkla, to give you and the audience a little bit of information about what it is that our platform is doing, to simplify it, we've built an eBay for the data center industry. Yeah. We've built a peer-to-peer exchange for secondhand hardware. We don't restrict ourselves from any types of assets. We don't restrict ourselves from trading, for example, IT assets like servers and switches, but we see predominantly that we're dealing with M&E assets, purely because I think there are other initiatives that are doing this that are robust and they have their place in the market. But when it comes to M&E assets, we enable a second life for infrastructure hardware through our marketplace. We have a list of global partners, about 64 partners in over 30 countries. We have a huge audience that we market to on a weekly basis. And in a sort of support to our growing platform, we actually decommission and remove M&E assets ourselves from a data center operator that needs to retrofit their facility. And in fact, we're currently doing this as we speak. And that's one way that we help operators to bridge the gap, and we take the workload off their hands and make accessing circular economy and contributing to sustainability easier for everyone.
Okay. And I guess the circular economy is also very good for emerging markets, so markets where maybe the capital is not there to build with the latest technology and the latest assets in the marketplace. How does this circular economy idea, how does this recycling second life really help new frontier and developing markets?
Circular economy benefits everyone. This is the one thing that I really want to shout to the world, is that being circular is beneficial to everyone. We look at emerging markets such as Eastern Europe and Africa. For example, Africa has the fastest growing digital economy in the world. And fantastic. We're seeing a lot of investment going into Africa and a lot of cable landing stations around there. Same with Eastern Europe. It's a huge emerging market. And globally, we see about 27,000 people joining the internet on a daily basis. this method of circular economy, speaking primarily about the product side and not going into the processes side, which is a completely different aspect of circular economy, what this can do is it enables markets that don't necessarily have the capex to have access to really high quality infrastructure that is being used by established and trusted data centers around the world. And it allows them to get online quicker. One thing that we see is that some of the lead times for acquiring infrastructure assets are huge, to the point where they're sometimes 12 to 18 months. This time gap could be a make or break deal for the operator that's looking to acquire these assets. If they don't get the equipment on time, their business model might not work properly. So if we're able to provide them high quality infrastructure hardware at low rates, at a very, very short lead time, that enables them to prosper. And then also it enables the operator on this side that's selling the assets to be more sustainable, to reduce to some extent, to the extent which is reasonable, their scope 3 emissions, and of course, position themselves as a green premium company which is focused on environmental conservation and circular economy. And that's exactly where Cirkla comes in. We come to bridge the gap between companies that have a need to get rid of their, well, operators that need to get rid of their infrastructure hardware, and operators around the world that need to have access to this hardware, but don't have the time to wait and don't have the capex to spend right now.
Okay, and I'm guessing the even the name Cirkla comes from the idea of circular economy.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, at least it makes sense, because I always like to know where the names come from. I think it's an important part of the business to understand the story behind the name.
I mean, it's only logical. It's only logical, you know.
Yeah.
Circular economy was the sort of DNA of Cirkla. So
Yeah.
look at the company rather. So we decided let's name it Cirkla. You know, and it only makes sense. Well spotted.
No, I think it's good. And then I was going to ask us to quickly finish, because we are kind of running out of time now. But
Sure.
what's the plans for Cirkla for the next 12, 18 months? And how can people find out more information and get involved?
Well, obviously, grow. What we, of course, I stand by the 3 pillars of sustainability that I mentioned earlier, which is educate, innovate, collaborate, and then ultimately we have to celebrate. You know, I think what we look to do over the next couple of months or the next year or so is really bring the idea more to market and educate the market about how it's okay to purchase secondhand infrastructure. You know. Again, I like to make the analogy of the car. If we're okay with buying a secondhand car, I think it should be the same case with infrastructure hardware. Granted, it's not as simple and straightforward as that. I make it sound very, very simple, but of course there are different challenges. But let's bridge the gap. Let's bridge the gap. If our diesel fuel tanks are being replaced with hydrogenated vegetable oil to bridge the gap between hydrogen fuel and diesel, I think we should also look at bridging the gap between reusing secondhand hardware and supporting the SDIA's 2030 goals of having a huge amount of infrastructure resold on secondhand markets. And of course, we want to make sure that the world understands sustainability is profitable for everyone, and it's a win-win-win situation for everybody involved.
Absolutely. So if people want to find out more, very briefly, how can they do so?
Well, please, for all the viewers, and of course, Joel, thank you again for having me on. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. For everyone else, thank you so much for watching. And you can definitely visit our website, www.cirkla.tech, tech as in short for technology. And alternatively, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to get together on a video call or an email chain, or if you're based in London, you can reach out to me, and I'm always happy to go and sit down and have a coffee and speak about data centers and sustainability.
Sounds great. Bardiya, thanks so much for coming on board. And thank you, our viewers, for tuning into JSA TV Live. Don't forget to check our social channels for more content. And until next time, happy networking.
Thank you.